I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. This video I want to talk about In the Earth, British director Ben Wheatley's welcome return to horror, and a film which I guess forevermore will now be referred to as Ben Wheatley's quarantine movie. It was a film conceived, written and created during the coronavirus quarantine period. I think that Wheatley just felt that he had to create something during that time, and whilst it's always welcome to have a new Ben Wheatley film, even more so for people like us to have a Ben Wheatley horror film, and I'm really grateful he turned these dire circumstances into something creative. It's a project that doesn't quite fully come together, although I am glad it exists. Let me try and explain. The story is set in a present where a virus much more deadly than the one we're currently facing is raging, but you needn't worry even though there's a virus in the background, and the whole piece speaks to the situation we're in now. I wouldn't necessarily say that this was a quarantine or a coronavirus type movie. This is just a creation that's come about under these very strange set of circumstances. We follow a scientist called Martin who has volunteered to join a government-run scientific outpost out in the North English countryside. His intention is to meet up with an ex-lover of his. Her name is Dr. Olivia Wendell, and the particular experiment that she's running is investigating, I'm going to have to read this, mycorrhiza. It's the symbiotic relationship between fungi and plant roots that create a network. Her idea is that it might find ways to yield increased crops. There's a huge tract now of English countryside which is under government control, and parcels of that land have been portioned out to various scientific projects to try and come up with, if not cures for this virus, ways that humanity can now live with it. She's been out of touch with the base for quite some time now, and Martin is taken by park ranger Alma to go and meet her and join her on her studies. There's no way to get there but on foot, and it is a 2-day journey. At the very start, in the centre of operations, we're met with a sort of replica of a wood carving of an old mythical figure called Parnag Feg, who is said to be the spirit of the woods here. We're told that this sort of plant and fungus fused network is at least 15 miles in radius. Martin suspects that it may actually underpin the entire of the British Isles and does work almost in the same way that our brains do, with those sort of connections. What we do find is that slap bang at the centre of this mycorrhizal network is also an ancient standing stone, and there are different opinions as to how we should perhaps interact with that. Some suggest ritual, art and spirituality, whereas Dr. Wendell believes that a purely scientific approach will yield some answers to a centuries-old mystery. So what's to celebrate about it? Ben Wheatley once again digging almost literally rather than figuratively into the soil of the British Isles to find the horror in its history. He's done so in Kill List, most spectacularly in A Field in England. I've not seen Sightseers, but I would be amazed if that doesn't also connect the British countryside with extreme physical violence. So this film is absolutely in his wheelhouse. It's absolutely the kind of stuff that I lap up. Intersection between science and pagan spirituality. Are there ancient wood spirits? Can we communicate with nature? What would nature possibly have to say back to us? Would they illuminate a way for us to eradicate the virus, or does nature perhaps want us gone? On the way to meet Dr. Wendell, because it's a 2-day trek, of course they have to camp overnight. Very eerie finding of another abandoned campsite, and they also meet up with a man who is living homeless in the woods, played by the wonderful Reece Shearsmith, who we know in Britain as one of the League of Gentlemen, also co-creator of Inside Number 9. Really, definitely, if you've never heard of him, check out Reece's work. The League of Gentlemen, Psychoville, Inside Number 9. You're welcome. All the elements are there, and that's why I'm really glad this movie exists. There's stuff in there that really presses all of my buttons. The whole, unfortunately, is less than the sum of its parts. I think the conception and the actually getting it doneness under these circumstances is to be absolutely hailed. I wonder if the same project under normal circumstances might not have been finessed and nuanced a little more. It feels like it's in need of something to just push it over the edge. It has elements there of Blair Witch being sort of alone and potentially lost in this vast countryside. It has elements of real brutal physical violence, sort of reminiscent of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the like, maybe the odd little bit of Saw. There's flesh and blood horror, as well as the possible sort of psychological Blairy witchiness of it all. When you're talking about fungus networks and nature and sort of trying to tap into communicating with these vast ancient things, you can absolutely bet your bottom dollar that there is a real trippiness to it, especially with the psychoactive mushrooms. So there are periods in there that are reminiscent of the trips in altered states. That's where this movie really comes into its own. There are sections there, a lot of strobing, so if you don't get on with strobing, maybe this is one to avoid. But the strobing and the editing and the soundscape, the score that's been created, has gone together to create some of probably the best trippy scenes I've ever seen. Between that, altered states, the end of 2001. Not the subtle trippiness of a film like Midsummer. This is really in-your-face stuff, and it's very, very effective. There's also a link back to something like the Stone Tapes, with this idea that modern scientific technology can investigate ancient stonework and ancient nature and networks and the like of that. Unfortunately, I don't think In the Earth ever reaches to the level of success that all of these influences have. It's not as successful and as focused as the Stone Tapes. It doesn't have the final thing to say that Altered States did. Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the like is another focused precision piece of work made in a small time scale with a small crew, and that did what it set out to do with a sort of scientific psychosis behind it, as really did Blair Witch. I think perhaps In the Earth has got too many things boiling away in its pot to get away with sort of emulating the small stripped back production that things like Blair Witch and Texas Chainsaw Massacre had to do when they were just focusing on uncovering one thing, spinning one plate. In the Earth spins so many plates and themes and subtexts that perhaps it's almost inevitable that it's slightly disappointing in that it can't ever really open the puzzle box and provide any answers. It's still an absolute caps off moment of filmmaking creativity in the jaws of adversity. There are elements in there that I will undoubtedly come back to. There are elements in there that are some of the best things he's ever done. It just never coalesces into a fantastic whole piece that it could do. So I'm left slightly disappointed, but glad it's here, and I hope that makes sense.